And welcome to our newest adult education seminar, Book Smart. Thank you, Ashley, for setting it all up and putting it all together. Always grateful. Thank you. Thank you. You know, we just had our wine and cheese, and wine improves with age. Wine, like wisdom, is better when it's old. We live in a culture today that if anything's more than 6 months old, you're going to throw it out. But that's why we thought it'd be a good idea to start our seminar today with wine and cheese, to realize and recognize that like wine, which only improves with age, so too is wisdom. This is more than meets the eye. This is not short-term, superficial, hedonistic pleasures, but deeper, more impactful, and longer-lasting pleasure, the pleasure of wisdom. Book Smart, an exploration of the most important books and titles in the culture and heritage of the people of the book. There's a true story about the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim was a great rabbi. He lived about 150 years ago. And he lived in Radin, Poland, when a wealthy Torah scholar passed away. A wealthy businessman, Torah scholar, passed away. He had a son who strayed from the ways of Judaism. His son was in business, wasn't religious. So in his will, this Torah scholar, he asked that all of his money should go to his son, and all of his books should go to the local yeshiva, to the yeshiva of the Chafetz Chaim. Now, the Chafetz Chaim was a wise man. He remarked at the irony, and he said, "What an upside-down world that we live in. The yeshiva, which has more wisdom than it needs the money, it got the books. The son, who needs wisdom, who needs Torah, who needs inspiration, he has more money than he needs. He gets the money, not the books." Tonight we're gathering here, this afternoon we're gathering to be able to explore and embrace our own heritage as the people of the book. I'd like to ask if we could please keep the questions to afterwards, so that way we can keep the flow moving nicely. If you have any questions, feel free to write them down. Do we have pens, Ashley, for everybody? Everybody should have Chabad pens, I think. So please write down your questions. We'll save them to afterwards. If you'd like to email me, I'm at rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. Also, I'd like to talk about tonight, before we start, about what we're not going to be addressing in this course. I'm going to try to move along quickly. We have a lot to cover. 3,300 years worth in 6 sessions is quite an impressive and bold attempt. So we're going to try to keep it moving forward. What we're not going to be addressing in this course is the origin of the Torah. We're not going to be talking about who wrote the Torah, if there's a God, how do we know that God wrote the Torah. That is for a different course. We're not going to be talking about the accuracy of the transmission of Torah over the past 3,300 years, nor are we going to be addressing the flexibility of Jewish law about where LGBTQ plus fits into modern Jewish law, or where it doesn't fit into Jewish law. That's a whole different kettle of fish. We're not going to be discussing what's in the canon and what's not in the canon of Jewish law. What we are going to be discussing is what is the Torah. What is the Torah? What does it include? And why? We'll find our bearings as educated, advanced, and sophisticated Jewish people in 2023, when we face our friends and family, our neighbors and fellow our Gentiles. They expect us to know who we are. So here it is, in 6 weeks, in 6 sessions, we're going to be addressing that. All of the above questions, by the way, we've already addressed in a separate course that we taught that was called Judaism Decoded. That course covered the origins of Torah, the transmission of Torah, the flexibility of Jewish law, and what was included in Torah. So that's a different course, Judaism Decoded. You can speak to the office if you want a copy of that. But for right now, we're going to be talking about book smart, understanding and finding our bearings in the books of the Torah. So welcome to Book Smart, 3,000 years of Jewish wisdom, incorporating every era and every locale wherever Jewish people have lived since we came out of Egypt. Remember the Passover story, 3,335 years ago. So I'd like to start off by asking, what do these words mean to you by a quick, rapid fire? What does Torah mean to you, anybody? What does Torah incorporate? Wisdom, okay. What does Medrash mean to you? Medrash, commentary, okay. How about Talmud? Also commentary, okay. Kabbalah, okay. Halacha, laws. Musar, ethics, okay, good. How about Hasidus? Sect? Yeah, sounds political. It's not political. We have Freudian slip. Okay. So these are terms that you may have heard. You may have heard over the ages. You may have heard them from me. You may have heard them from other rabbis. You may have read about these terms. But what exactly do they mean? Why are there so many different parts to the Torah? What differentiates between them? This is all what we're going to be exploring in this course. You've heard of them, but what do they really mean? We're going to be focusing on this in the seminar, on the main genres, the 6 main genres of Torah, incorporating we'll be discussing their nature and character, who authored them, when and how they developed, and what they aim to achieve. Most importantly, besides for understanding the bearings of these genres, we will actually be experiencing them primarily in the next 5 sessions. Today, we're going to be breaking the ice. So each class that we're going to be going into will incorporate 2 parts. The first part will incorporate an overview of the nature and the purpose and the history of that genre of Torah. And the second part will incorporate a hands-on experience of being able to feel and experience that part of Torah. I took my kids this past Sunday to Orlando, went to a beautiful aquarium, and it was nice to see the fish from a distance. But at one point in the aquarium, they took us into where you could touch the starfish, you could touch the anemones, sea anemones. It was just, for the kids, that was the most beautiful part, to be able to experience the everything that they had spoken about and just seeing through the thick glass. I'd like to start off by introducing to you the map of the Torah. If you could please open up your student textbook, you'll find an insert, hopefully it's still there, an insert which looks like this. Now this is quite the document, this page in your textbook. It's double-sided. I'd like you to turn to the side which is more colorful, the one with that looks more like the rainbow. And right here, you've got, it looks a little bit overwhelming, it's for starters, but I'd like you to try to find your bearings over here. As this, the colorful side with the reds, orange, green, and blues side. This side is the timeline map of primary Torah works. If you look at the very, very bottom of that side, you'll see a timeline which starts off at 1300 BCE. 1300 BCE is 3,300 years ago. 3,300 years ago. Okay? That's when the Jewish people came out of Egypt. That's when Moses was leading the Jewish people. And you'll notice on the far left side of the page, in the black, there you've got the Torah, the prophets, and the scriptures. You'll notice that the Torah predates the prophets and the scriptures by just a little bit. You can match it to the timeline at the very bottom. And that goes all the way through until you reach the colors on the second fold, of the trifold. So everything on the left, everything which is in the black is part of the written Torah, and the 2 sides to the right is all part of the oral Torah. You see at the top over here, there's a little written Torah, oral Torah indicator. So everything in the black is written Torah. Everything to the right is oral Torah. Now I'd like you to take a look in the middle of the page of the black. There's a little number 1. that says lesson 1. In lesson 1, we're going to be talking only about the black, primarily about the black. Then, if you look at the very, very far right, you'll see lesson 2. You see lesson 2 in the red. That's going to be addressing the Medrash. Lesson 3 is the orange. We'll be addressing the Talmud and commentaries. Lesson 4 in the lighter orange will be addressing Halacha, the code of Jewish law. Lesson 5 incorporates Musar, which is ethics and philosophy. And lesson 6, which is the teal and blue sort of, is Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, right? So this is a very, very interesting fold out for you to be able to try to find your bearings. We'll be referencing this throughout this entire seminar. So please don't lose it. Try to keep it handy, and we'll follow along with it. So let's get started. Without any further ado, when we say Torah, what exactly are we talking about? You know, in our holy ark right here, in the ark, we have the scroll, right? The scroll. You see a picture of it on the screen right now, right? That's the parchment kept in the ark of the synagogue. Is that the Torah? It is the Torah, right? It's the 5 books of Moses. It's the Torah, right? But in addition to that, there is a massive, this scroll, let me just elaborate on it. This scroll incorporates the Parsha of the week. There's 54 portions in the Torah, 54 Parshas, and they are the portion of Bereshis and Noach and Lech Lecha. And when all of us were born on a particular Parsha of the week, we all had our bar mitzvahs on a particular Parsha of the week. By the way, if you didn't have a bar mitzvah, we can arrange it for you. So give me a call. Let me know if you would like to arrange one with the greatest of pleasure. Okay, please let Ashley know. She'll set it up for you. We all have a portion in the Torah. On every Shabbos, we read a portion of the Torah so that we finish the entire Torah in 1 year. We start on Simchas Torah. Well, we start really right after Simchas Torah. And we finish reading the Torah on Simchas Torah, which comes right after Yom Kippur. In this book of the Torah on the screen, you have a little bit under 80,000 words. It's the length of a short novel. Now, we as a community here are experiencing the great fortune of being able to write our very own Torah scroll. It's the Sefer Torah for a Safer World. I hope that you've heard about it. We're having a finale fete gala on March 14th, I think it is. Yeah, March 14th. And I hope that you'll be able to join us for this very, very special event as we are completing the writing of our very own Torah. This book was transcribed by Moses over 40 years from the year 1213 BCE, as you'll see in the timeline, all the way through to 1273 BCE in the Sinai Desert. But in addition to the scroll that you see on the screen, there's another part of the Torah. Oops, too fast. Sorry. Okay, this one. There it is. The library of Torah books. Like that. Is that the Torah? Not the Torah. There are hundreds of thousands of books. Tens of thousands of authors coming from all sorts of different places, written over 3,000 years. And they are all books of Torah. These are Torah books. In fact, there's a whole discussion in Torah. If the 613th mitzvah of the Torah, the 613 commandments, right? The 613th mitzvah of the Torah, I was just studying this with Rav Berger. The 613th mitzvah is to write your own Torah scroll, which is why we as a community are writing our own Torah scroll and allowing every person the opportunity to dedicate a letter or a word or a verse or a portion in the Torah to be able to make that your own. But there is an opinion that you can fulfill that mitzvah by merely buying one of those books and putting it in your home. Because when you buy a book of Torah, you're actually already writing a portion of Torah. So the big question is, which one is it? Is the Torah the scroll that's in the ark? Or is the Torah the articulation of the same body of wisdom? Sorry, they are two articulations of the same body of wisdom and knowledge? Is it the scroll in the ark, or is it the hundreds of thousands of books of the Torah? We have to be able to find our bearings to understand what it is that we're talking about when we speak about Torah. What's the difference between the Torah that's in the ark and all the other books? Anybody know what this is? So this is a scroll. This is the scroll of Esther. We read this on Purim. This is written exactly like a Torah, but it's not in the ark. This actually is stored in its own little container, however you wish, and it's not part of the Torah. I mean, is it part of the Torah? Is it not part of the Torah? It's not in the ark. So which one is really the Torah? What's the difference between them, and how did this difference happen? Now, it's at this point that we're introduced to the Torah that's written and the Torah that is oral. What's known as the written Torah and what's known as the oral Torah. On your map, everything in the black, on the left, on the first fold, is written Torah. Everything on the colorful side is the oral Torah. That would incorporate the Talmud and the Medrash and the Kabbalah and the Musar and the Hakira and the Hasidus, all of which we're going to be learning about in the subsequent classes of the seminar. But generally speaking, there are two dimensions of Torah that are called the written and the oral Torah. On the screen, it's not working so well. On the screen, the Torah scroll is made up of the 5 books of Moses, written over 40 years in the Sinai desert. And then you've got the general Torah, which is the hundreds of thousands of writings over 3,300 years in all corners of the world. The written Torah, incorporates within it how many books? Anybody know? 24. There are 24 books of the written Torah. We know when you said 5, you meant the 5 books of Moses. But bear in mind that there's actually a lot more than just the 5 books of Moses. And again, I'd like you to turn to the map, to the black side of the map, and you'll notice that there's Torah, prophets, and scriptures. Torah, prophets, and scriptures. There are 5 books of Torah, 5 books of Moses in Torah. Then there are 8 books of prophets. And there are 11 books of scriptures or writing, one of which is the scroll of Esther, which we'll be exploring in just a few minutes in much more detail. You'll notice it's all listed for you nicely in this book. In this map, when you look at Torah, you've got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are the 5 books of Moses. But when you look at the prophets, you've got Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings of Obadiah, Jonah, Hosea. You got all the books of the prophets. And at the bottom here in the scriptures, you've got the 11 books of the scriptures or the writings. These 3 parts of the written Torah, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings or the scriptures, were written in the 1,000 years past Moses. And it's all encapsulated in what's called the Tanakh. You've heard of that term, Tanakh? Tanakh is an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Torah, prophets, writings, and it actually fits under 1,000 pages in a volume. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy the Tanakh on Amazon. It's 1,000 pages, a little less, of the written Torah. The oral Torah, however, is everything else. The oral Torah is not written per se. It incorporates the Talmud, the Medrash, the Halacha, the Kabbalah, and the Hakira, all of which we're going to be discussing later over this course. It's handed over orally from teacher to disciple. Every individual, it originally was supposed to be oral, and for reasons which we're going to discuss in lesson 3, it was actually transcribed, it was written down, but it was supposed to have remained oral, and it includes the teachings that follow the 24 books of the Tanakh. Turns out that you've got 2 parts to the Torah. You've got the written and the spoken parts of the Torah. And I'd like you to just see for a moment on text number 1 on page 4. If you turn to your student book, page 4, text number 1, where the Talmud makes it clear to us, the words that were given in writing, you are not allowed to communicate orally. What's that talking about? That's the written Torah. And the words that were taught orally, you are not allowed to communicate them in writing. This is talking about the oral Torah. So there's two different Torahs, the written Torah, and then there's the oral Torah. The oral Torah was also written down about 1,800 years ago, about 1,200 years after Moses, for various reasons. We'll be talking about that in lesson 3. It's still called the oral Torah. It seems that whereas the written Torah emphasizes the book, the oral Torah emphasizes the speakers, the people. And the question we have to ask ourselves today is, why the difference? Why do we need to have these two different parts of Torah? Why does it have to be so complicated that you have a book and you have an oral version of the book? Why is this? It sounds a little too complicated for a book. You buy a book on Amazon, it's done. You've received the book, it's over. But here, there's two components. There's the written Torah and the oral Torah. Why do we need this format? Now, we're not going to answer the question right now. Before we can really get into the answer, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into the written Torah. Let's experience a guided tour into the foundation of it all, into the written Torah. So what is inside of the Tanakh? As mentioned earlier, you'll see it here on the screen. Tanakh, which you see on the screen, is an acronym in Hebrew, T-N-C-H. The T stands for Torah. The N stands for Nevi'im, which means prophets. And the Ch stands for Ketuvim, which means writings. These are the three parts of the written Torah, as mentioned earlier. And you can actually see this in your textbook in figure 1.3 on page 7. We mapped it out for you nicely on page 7 in the textbook. You'll see over here where the top of the page has the 5 books of Torah. The prophets, you've got your 8 books of prophets. Can anybody count 8 books of prophets over there? It's not really 8. It's 7 plus 12. Everything's complicated in Torah. It's actually 19. The reason is because the last 12 are called the 12. They are very short books, and for fear of them getting lost, the sages incorporated them into one book. Some of them are just one chapter or 2 chapters. So these 12 separate books, which we'll be exploring in just a few moments, these 12 books will incorporate into one book. So you have 7 books of the prophets, plus the 12 books, which makes up one. So really, how many prophets are there? There's really 19. But it's really 7 plus 1, right? 7 plus 1, which makes up 8 general books of the prophet. We're finding our bearings here, right? And then at the bottom of the page, you'll see the writings. We have the 11 books of the writings. And again, if you turn now to your map, but this time I'd like you to turn to the other side of the map, the back side of the map, the one with the green and blue line down the middle. When you look at this side now, you'll notice that this map now maps out the 24 books of the Tanakh with a biography for each book. So you'll see in the top left of the page in the orange, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are the 5 books of Torah. In the green, you have all the prophets from Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, and then you got the 12 over here. You got the 12 in the middle of the page. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micha, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Right? Those are the middle. The 12 books of the prophets are in the middle. They are one collective book. And at the bottom of the page, you've got the 11 books of the writings, including Psalms of King David, Proverbs of King Solomon, Job, which was apparently written by Moses, Song of Songs written by King Solomon, Ruth, Lamentations by Jeremiah, Ecclesiastes by King Solomon, Esther of the Purim story, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. So if you look at the back here, you can really get a snapshot of all of the 24 books of the written Torah of the Tanakh, and it describes them to you in somewhat detail, giving you just a little bit of context to explain the purpose of each book. So let me ask you a question. If you were a librarian and you never heard of the Bible before, and now you had to somebody brought you a new book called the Bible, the Tanakh, the written Torah. Which part of the library, you never heard of religion before, which part of the library would you put the Bible in? Would it go to ethics? Oops, I went too fast. Sorry, my PowerPoint isn't working all that well today. Would it go to ethics? Or history? Philosophy or law? Which one would it go to? All of the above. You know, you heard about the guy came to the librarian looking for the self-help section. Librarian said, if I was to tell you what the self-help section is, wouldn't that defeat the purpose? So, as many of you pointed out, the Torah, the written Torah, actually fits in every single section. Because what you see in this map, the 5 books of Moses, the 8 books of the prophets, and the 11 books of the writings, incorporate within them the corpus of law, ethics, morals, history, literature, poetry. It's really got it all. And in fact, if you look in page 8, the Mishnah tells us about the Torah, delve into it, for all is in it. See with it, grow old and worn in it, do not budge from it, for there is nothing better. The Torah incorporates within it every single kind of wisdom. This is God's wisdom. It's got every single kind of wisdom within it. And that's the reason why the word Torah means what? Torah means a teacher. Remember when you were in Hebrew school? What did you call the teacher? Morah? Morah means a teacher. It's the same exact word. Torah means a teacher, an instruction, or a guide towards life, because the mitzvahs in the Torah cover every aspect of Torah. Sorry, every aspect of Torah is an instruction for life in general. Now, at this point, I'd like to show you a very special video presentation. This video is about 7 minutes long. It's a little long, but what we're going to be doing in this video is going to be seeing a summary, a snapshot of all of the 24 books of the Tanakh. We're going to be summarizing every single one of them. It's moving quickly. You'll have a review of it. We'll send you a recording if you want to watch it again. So try to understand. You may want to follow along with your map as you watch this video. The map with the green and blue lines, which will cover the entirety of the Tanakh. We're going to summarize it all in 7 minutes. Here goes.
The book, the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. No book has had a greater impact on human history, on human civilization. No book has been more devoutly read, more diligently studied, more deeply probed. What's in the Tanakh? Who wrote it or transcribed it? And when? Join us for a journey that spans thousands of years, a journey traversed by shepherds and kings, prophets and prophetesses, scribes and seers, as we explore the 24 books, the 929 chapters, and the 22,864 verses that comprise the Jewish Bible. The Tanakh consists of 3 components: Torah, Nevi'im, or prophets, and Ketuvim, or writings. The first section, Torah, is the most fundamental text of Judaism, transcribed by Moses during the 40 years that the people of Israel were traveling through the wilderness. This is the text inscribed in the Torah scroll, the most sacred object in Judaism. The Torah consists of 5 books, the 5 books of Moses, also called the Chumash. The Torah recounts the origins of the Jewish people, but even more importantly, it contains the 613 mitzvot, divine commandments that define our mission in life and the covenant between God and the people of Israel. The book of Genesis describes the creation of the world and the formative events of early human history. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Cain and Abel, Noah's flood, the Tower of Babel, and the lives and deeds of the founding fathers and mothers of the people of Israel, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob, Rachel and Leah, Joseph and his brothers. Genesis also includes the 7 Noahide laws and 3 of the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. The book of Exodus describes the Exodus from Egypt, the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and the construction of the tabernacle. It includes the 10 commandments and 101 other mitzvot. The book of Leviticus records 247 mitzvot commanded by God to Moses pertaining to the temple service, the kosher dietary laws, the festivals of the Jewish year, and a variety of ritualistic, social, and civil laws, including the maxim, love your fellow as yourself. The book of Numbers recounts the events of the Israelites' 40-year journey through the wilderness. It also includes 52 mitzvot. The book of Deuteronomy contains Moses' final address to the people of Israel before his passing. It reviews many of the events and laws of the previous 3 books, as well as 200 additional mitzvot. A Jew lives with the Torah 365 days a year, and the 5 books are divided into 54 sections or parshiot. Each week, another parsha is publicly read in the synagogue, and each parsha has 7 sections so that each day of the week has its distinct lesson of the day to study and apply to our lives. The 8 books of the prophets section of Tanakh record the words and deeds of the prophets who brought the word of God to the people in the centuries after Moses. The first 4 books in this section are primarily historical, recounting the events from the children of Israel's settlement of the Holy Land to the destruction of the first temple. The book of Joshua describes the conquest of the Holy Land and its apportionment among the 12 tribes of Israel. Judges describes events during the 14 generations of the judges who led the people of Israel in the centuries after the passing of Joshua. The book of Samuel recounts the lives and deeds of the prophet Samuel, King Saul, and King David. And Kings recounts the history of the kingdoms of Judah and Israel. Isaiah was sent by God to convey prophecies of consolation over the destruction of the Holy Temple and the exile, and to describe the future messianic age of peace, perfection, and divine revelation. Jeremiah warned that Jerusalem will be destroyed because of the people's sins and injustices, but also conveyed the promise that the exiles to Babylon will return after 70 years. Ezekiel described his vision of the divine chariot that is the source for many of the mystical teachings of Kabbalah and of the Third Holy Temple of the Messianic era. The last book in the prophets section is composed of 12 smaller books recording the prophecies of 12 prophets. Hosea, who God instructs to marry an unfaithful woman in order to experience firsthand God's interminable love for his people despite their unfaithfulness. Amos, who denounces the exploitation of the weak and poor by the rich and powerful, and speaks about the hypocrisy in serving God while failing to practice justice and charity. The story of Jonah, which teaches the power of prayer and of repentance. Joel and Nahum, who foretell the divine judgment of the nations who persecuted the people of Israel. Obadiah, Micah, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah prophesy the future messianic age of peace and perfection when all nations will unite to serve God. And the last 3 prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, encouraged the people during the difficulties of their return from Babylon to build the Second Temple. The words of the prophets are also incorporated into the annual Torah reading cycle in the form of the Haftorah, selected portions from the prophets which we read after the public Torah reading on Shabbat and other special occasions. The third section of Tanakh, the writings, include 11 books, composed by King David in the Holy Land some 3,000 years ago. The Psalms of the book of Tehillim express the yearnings, tribulations, and exaltations of the Jewish experience in every land and in every generation. Psalms form an integral part of every Jewish prayer and are read, wept, and sung at every occasion from a birth to a funeral. Whenever a Jew has the need to plead for divine assistance, celebrate a triumph, or simply talk to God, the verses of Tehillim give voice to the outpourings of his or her soul. Also in the writing sections are 3 books containing the wisdom of King Solomon. Proverbs contains aphorisms on the virtues of wisdom, hard work, and a moral life. Song of Songs is a pastoral love song that metaphorically describes the relationship between God and Israel. Ecclesiastes speaks of the transience of life and the futility of worldly pursuits. Also in the writing section, the book of Job confronts the question, why do the righteous suffer? Ruth tells the story of the Moabite princess who converted to Judaism and became the ancestress of King David. Lamentations mourns the destruction of the Holy Temple and the exile of Israel. The Scroll of Esther recounts the story of Purim, when Haman's plot to annihilate all the Jews in the Persian Empire was foiled by Queen Esther and Mordecai. The visions and deeds of Daniel, the Judean prince who served in the royal courts of Babylonia and Persia, are in the book that bears his name. Daniel also prophesied on the rise and fall of nations and the timing of the Messianic redemption. Ezra and Nehemiah describes the Jewish people's return from Babylon, the reestablishment of their commitment to the Torah, and the building of the Second Holy Temple. Chronicles contains a summary of the whole of biblical history. 5 of the books of the writings section, also called the 5 Scrolls, are publicly read in select times of the year. The Scroll of Esther on Purim, Ruth on Shavuot, Song of Songs on Passover, Lamentations on Tisha B'Av, and Ecclesiastes on Sukkot. 1,000 years after the revelation at Sinai, in the first generation of the Second Temple era, the 120 prophets and sages of the Great Assembly canonized the 24 books of the Tanakh. This is the written Torah, upon which all subsequent Torah learning and discussion is based.
Okay. So that's quite the summary there. Very well done. Right, very beautiful presentation there about what really, wow. We've heard some of these words, we read about Esther and Purim, we heard about Song of Songs, maybe a little bit of Proverbs, but where does it all fit together? Wow, how nice to organize it in our own minds, to be able to realize and put things into perspective. This is a video which you may want to watch and rewatch a couple times to be able to properly understand, together with your map that you may want to watch, that you want to follow along with as you go through it. But why are there 3 parts to the written Torah? We're still trying to analyze the written Torah before we understand why we need an oral Torah. But why do we have 3 parts of the written Torah? The Torah, prophets, and the writings. How do we get 3 different categories? But why 3? Why not 6? Why not 16 categories? Where does it come from? Why do we have 3 categories? The reason is, you see, you can't say it's historical. Again, if you look at your map, where's that map again? Here it is. If you look at that map again, remember the blue and the green one. No, sorry, the colorful one. If you look at the map with the timeline, you'll notice that the prophets and scriptures were pretty much at the same time in history. They were pretty much like the book of Judges and Joshua happened before Job. So you can't say that the prophets was later or before the scriptures. Historically, on the timeline, when you put things into historical context, it's pretty much at the same time. Also, some of the various books in the different genres of the Tanakh are written by the same people. So Moses, who transcribed the 5 books of Moses, was also the one who transcribed the book of Job, which has somehow landed up in the scriptures. Why? What's the reason for that? The answer is that the 3 parts of Tanakh represent 3 levels of divine revelation. And you can see this on figure 1.4 on page 8. Here it is. It's on the screen as well. 3 forms of divine revelation. The Torah, the 5 books of Moses, was a divine communication. The prophets was only prophecy, and the writings was what we call the divine spirit. 3 successively decreasing levels of divine revelation. Let's talk about this. So the first one is the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. This happened 50 days after the plague of the firstborn. Passover night, we're celebrating the Seder, right? We're celebrating this year 3,351 years since the plague of the firstborn on the night of Passover. That's this year, it's like April 10th or something, right? On that night, in the year 1313 BCE, the Jewish people experienced the plague of the firstborn in Egypt. A mere 50 days later, on the 6th of Sivan, and we were just talking about this before, Judy, 50 days after, 7 weeks after the plague of the firstborn, this is when they stood at the foot of Mount Sinai in the Sinai desert, when God revealed to the Jewish people and to Moses the 10 commandments. These 10 commandments were given directly from God. Moses stayed on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights as God taught him there the entire Torah. There's actually 2 different opinions in the Talmud about how the written Torah scroll came to be, the one we have in the Ark. If on Mount Sinai, God gave us the 10 commandments, right? Gave us the 10 commandments, which is it's like the trailer of the movie. You know, you have a movie, you have the trailer. So the 10 commandments is like the preview of what's coming in the whole book. So how was the Torah scroll, the 5 books of Moses, written? So there's 2 opinions in the Talmud. One is that he immediately wrote down what he saw at Sinai, which is the books of Genesis and Exodus. And then over the next 40 years in the desert, Moses wrote down by divine inspiration the books of Leviticus and Numbers as they were told to him by God. And the 5th book of Deuteronomy, he wrote just before he died. A second opinion in the Talmud is that he wrote all 5 books just before he died. Either way, Moses wrote the 5 books of the Torah in the desert, 1313 BCE, minus 40 years. That's when we received the 5 books of Moses. Moses writes the 5 books of Moses over 40 years, including the mitzvahs, 613 commandments, and the events pre-Sinai from the creation of the world, and the events post-Sinai until the Jewish people enter the promised land, which is where the 5 books of Moses ends, when Moses dies. The very last passage of the 5 books of Moses is Moses' death and about the Jewish people standing on the threshold of the promised land. Actually, Moses really presented 13 Torah scrolls, 1 to each of the 12 tribes, plus a 13th scroll that was placed inside of the Holy Ark in the tabernacle or the temple. You've heard of Indiana Jones, right? What was inside of the Ark? I don't know if they showed this in the movie, but did they ever open the Ark in the movie? Inside of the Ark was the 10 commandments and the Torah scroll. That was the 13th Torah scroll. And the broken tablets, that too. The broken tablets, the good tablet, the unbroken tablets. And the Torah scroll, which was there for reference purposes to make sure that there was never going to be ever any mistake. It's interesting, by the way, you'll hear the number 40 a few times. 40 days on the mountain. They were in the desert for 40 years. What's the significance of the number 40? The Kabbalah explains this to us. That's going to be lesson 6, but just a preview. The number 40 is the number of transmission. If you want to reach the wisdom of your teacher, it's going to take you 40 years. That's Aramaic. Takes 40 years for a person to reach the wisdom of one's teacher. So for us to be able to incorporate the wisdom of God, it took us 40 intervals, 40 days, 40 years, right? The 13th Torah, right? I spoke about that. Now this 5 books of Moses, with its 304,805 letters. 5 books of Moses, 54 portions, 304,805 letters. There's a very strict law about the formation of every single one of these letters. You know, when we read the Torah here on Shabbos, which looks a lot like this, right? It's a scroll, it's ink and parchment, right? If there is one mistake in the Torah, which means a missing letter, a touching letter, we fold up the Torah, we put it back in the Ark, it's no longer kosher. We put it back. There were very, very strict laws there are strict laws about the formation of each letter. There's a zero tolerance policy in the 5 books of Moses as to errors and omissions, which is amazing. That thousands of years before the printing press, photocopies, exact photocopies, were thus created everywhere around the world. So you today can find the Torah, whether it's from New Zealand or Vladivostok, a Torah from Argentina or Nova Scotia, a Torah that's 1,000 years old, a Torah that's 1,500 years old, and you'll notice that every single one of those Torahs is exactly the same. No one extra letter, no one missing letter. But now let's talk about the 3 levels of divine revelation. So Moses was the one who brings to us the 5 books of Torah, what's known as the 5 books of Moses, right? Unlike prophecy, which goes through the medium of the prophets and needs to be interpreted by the prophet, Moses actually experienced crystal clear communication. Take a look. Here it is on the screen. Exodus 33:11, God would speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his fellow. And you can see that on page 9, text number 3, that exact verse. So Moses' prophecy was unparalleled by any other prophet of the history of our nation. Not that I've experienced this myself, but prophecy, apparently, they say, is something which goes through the process of a dream, a metaphor, an apparition, which needs subsequently to be interpreted. But Moses, God would speak to him face to face as a man speaks to his fellow. And that was unique to Moses. Moses was the one who experienced the most intense revelation of divinity of all of the 3 parts of the written Torah and any other part of the Torah as well. It was straight up, crystal clear, like I'm talking to you right now. In fact, the way Moses received this revelation is called, in Hebrew, Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi, which means the divine presence was speaking through his throat. He would open his mouth, and it wasn't him who was speaking, it was the divine presence that was speaking through his own throat. So when Moses would say, whatever he would say, that was the manifestation of the divine presence. Such was the clarity of communication. The next level of the Tanakh, the second stage after the 5 books of Torah, the 5 books of Moses, is the prophets. Now, what's the prophets? We just explained what the prophets is. The prophets are those who received prophecy in a way that was through a dream or through a metaphor or through an apparition. They would experience some sort of a revelation which they subsequently needed to interpret. And when you read the words of the prophets, you'll see. Jeremiah will speak about a pot that he saw, or some sort of a chariot. He saw a chariot with certain entities on the wheels, and they were a manifestation of some divine idea. It was a metaphor. Just like a metaphor conceals the idea, the wisdom, so to the prophecy is a diluted form of the original divine revelation. It's because of this difference between the prophets and the 5 books of Moses, because the prophets are a mitigated form of divine revelation, that the prophets cannot override anything that's in the predecessor, that's in the 5 books of Moses. You see, the 613 commandments are all contained in the 5 books of Moses. No subsequent prophet can ever rise up and say, actually, we're going to scratch that one. There's a whole religion made out of that, you know. You don't know what I'm talking about? Christianity. Christianity is a religion that says, actually, that there was a prophet who came up and he said, you know, take 2. We made a mistake. We're going to start all over again. We're going to render the first book as a first draft, an Old Testament, and we're going to make a New Testament. You can't do that. That would be like me saying, you know, Moses, we appreciate everything that you've done for the Jewish people. But me, Rabbi Vigler, with all the powers invested in me by the community of Palm Beach Gardens, we're going to override you, Moses. So thank you. We hope you have a nice retirement. I mean, that's not very nice. I can't do that. What gives me the right to do that? I'm just little me, nobody, garnished with garnished, right? I'm nothing. I'm a nobody. Moses is this towering giant, divine revelation speaking through his throat. Me, I'm some schnook in Palm Beach Gardens. What gives me the right to override him? Can't do that. And that's why in the prophets, you'll find no addition and no subtraction from anything that was incorporated in the 5 books of Moses. Take a look at this text on text number 3. If there be a prophet amongst you, I, God, will make myself known to them in a vision. I will speak to them in a dream. Not so as my servant Moses. In all my house he is trusted. Mouth to mouth, I speak to him in a vision and not in riddles. He gazes at the image of God. Think about, have you ever stared at the sun? Have you ever stared at the sun? You can't, it's too much, you go blind. But imagine if you had the power to stare at the sun. That's Moses. Moses was the one who was able to stare at the light and take it in. Can you drink from a fire hydrant? Can't. But imagine you could. That's a Moses. A Moses is one that's able to accept the light the way it is in its original format. The rest of the prophets are the ones that needed to experience it in a diluted version. So what is then the role of the prophets? Their role is to inspire the nation, to exhort the people to repent, to warn them of calamity, to give them hope for subsequent salvation. They also, the prophets, expound on classic Torah themes such as prayer, charity, justice, and other values. But they cannot replace or override that which came before them because it was a greater divine revelation. The Torah thus is the legal code, the core, the root of it all, the root of Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Whereas the prophets, the 19 books of prophets, which is 7 plus 12, right? 7 plus 12, 12 incorporated in 1. So it's 8 books of prophets, which is really 19 books of prophets, right? As depicted on your map. Those 19 books of the prophets are the ideological, inspirational, and moral teachings of the written Torah. Okay? So that's the between between the 5 books of Moses and the prophets. We're left with one more. And what is that? That would be the Ketuvim, the writings, the Tanakh. Remember, Tanakh is three parts: Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. The third part, which is the 11 books of the writings, Song of Songs, Tehillim, Book of Ruth, Book of Esther, right? Book of Tehillim. Here, in the books of the writings, there's even a lesser degree of divine inspiration than the prophets received. Here, there is not even an explicit revelation as the prophet might receive in a dream or an apparition. Here, it's something else entirely. Let's take a look at this idea on text number 4. No, it's not. Text number 5. This is in the words of Maimonides. Maimonides is a great, great rabbi, doctor, 850 years ago. Page number 11, text number 5. Maimonides actually describes to us what is Ruach HaKodesh, which is the divine inspiration. Take a look. The person feels as if something has come upon them and as if they have received a new power that drives them to speak. They speak words of wisdom, or compose hymns, or exhort their fellows with useful advice, or discourse on matters of communal leadership or theology. All this while they are awake and in full possession of their senses. Not so the prophets, by the way. The prophets would go into a state of semi-consciousness or unconsciousness when they would prophesy. All this while they're awake and in full possession of their senses. Such a person is said to speak by Ruach HaKodesh, by divine inspiration. It was through this kind of divine inspiration that David composed the Psalms, and Solomon composed the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. Also Daniel, Job, Chronicles, and the rest of the writings were written in this manner. In reference to such Ruach HaKodesh, David says, the Spirit of God spoke in me, and his word is on my tongue, i.e. the Spirit of God caused him to speak these words. So Maimonides defines this third level of the written Torah, the Ketuvim, the writings, as divine inspiration, a lower level of prophecy. Maybe you can say it this way. Moses experienced divine inspiration in his throat. The prophets experienced divine inspiration in their minds and hearts. But in the writings, David, Solomon, Esther, Mordechai, Daniel, Moses in the book of Job, there they experienced divine inspiration in the pen, where they would write And then they'd look at it and say, oh my gosh, did I write that? That's awesome. It's called in other terminology, achizas hakulmus, which means in Aramaic, the grasping of the quill. Where the quill is grasped by some sort of higher power, and it makes you write things. I have to tell you, sometimes I write my weekly messages or things like that, and I look at it sometimes, I'm like, oh, I can't believe I wrote. That's the book of David. Okay. So in conclusion, all three parts of the Tanakh that you see here on the screen, all three parts of the Tanakh, the Torah, 5 books of Moses, the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim are all from God. They were transcribed, as we saw in the video, during the era of prophecy, which is from the time that Moses brought the Jews out of Egypt until 1,000 years later, which was the 4th century BCE. It was the first generation of the Second Temple. Just to give you a quick context on that, Moses brings the Jews out of Egypt, right? Then it takes us a couple hundred years till we conquer the Promised Land. No, till we fight off the enemies inside of the Promised Land. It takes us a couple hundred years until we build our first temple. But our first temple was destroyed by whom? The Babylonians, Tisha B'Av, right? They exiled us off to Babylon, which was then subsequently conquered by Persia, the Iranians. Now, the Iranians were the ones who sponsored the construction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. The Iranians. Remember, this is the son of Esther and Achashverosh. His name was Darius II, also known as Cyrus II. It was interesting when they did the when Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I think it was Mike Pompeo who referenced him. I mean, I'm not to get political right now, but just purely historical. He referenced him as Cyrus because Cyrus was a Persian king, a non-Jew, who recognized the sovereignty of Jerusalem. So it's because of that Second Temple era that was that reference to Trump. In any event, what happened was that when they came to build the Second Temple in Jerusalem, they now were being led by people like Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Malachi was also known as Mordechai of the Purim story. These were the last of the prophets, the ones that built the Second Temple in Jerusalem. And whenever we take our community to Israel, we always show them in the city of David the foundations, the Persian architecture of the Second Temple. Because the Second Temple was actually built by Persian, under Persian guard and protectorate. Because they were coming from Iran, they were coming from Persia after the Purim story, and that's where the Hanukkah story takes place during the Second Temple. So it was these men of the Great Assembly, known as Anshe Knesset Hagadola, Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Esther, Nebuch. She stayed back in Persia because she was married to Achashverosh. She had a political marriage she had to take care of. She's still buried, by the way, in Iran together with Mordechai. It's a fascinating place to visit. We'd love to make a community trip to Iran one day. Wouldn't that be nice? Chabad Pamish Gardens goes to Iran, right? Okay, so at that time, there was the men of the Great Assembly. This was the 120 sages, which incorporated the last of the prophets of Israel. And they were the ones that canonized the Tanakh into Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. They were the ones that formalized Judaism to the way that we know it. 95% of Judaism, the way we have it today, from the Passover Seder to the prayer book called the Siddur, to the way that we mourn, to the way that we do pretty much everything, was organized by the men of the Great Assembly, these sages. They were the ones that canonized the Tanakh, and all books past this point, once again in the timeline, all books past this point are no longer part of the written Torah. Now they are part of the oral Torah, which is what we're about to get into right now. So we mentioned that the written Torah incorporates historical and legal and inspirational and poetry and philosophy. I'd like you to turn your attention quickly to page 30 in the textbook, which is at the very end. And just get a little sampling here today, just a quick sampling of what's actually inside of the written Torah. Anybody here, can you think of any famous passages in the Torah? Anybody? Any passages in the Torah come to mind? Anything? Shema Yisrael is in the book of Deuteronomy. What else? Anything else you can think of in the Torah? Genesis, that's at the very beginning. You'll find that on page 30, right? There's the stories of creation of the human being. We come across the first Jew, the burning bush, the holy life, which is the book of Leviticus, journeying through the desert, the birth of the Jewish people, the Shema Kori you just mentioned is on page 36, I think it is. Then we move on to the prophets. After that, you move on to the prophets, which is Nathan's rebuke of David, the book of Isaiah. You'll see that on page 38. It's about the future redemption, talking about the Messiah. You got the book of Ezekiel on page 40, which talks about the valley of dry bones and the resurrection. I'd like you now to turn your attention, please, to page 46. Very interesting page. Page 46 and 47. Here you have a selection of sayings from the book of Proverbs of King Solomon, the wisest of all men. Would you mind taking 2 minutes to ponder the book of Proverbs, page 46 and 47, and please let me know which of these proverbs catches your attention, which you find inspirational, meaningful, personal, or relevant. Give me 2 minutes. You collect these quotes. Now you know where they come from. Anybody want to share a favorite inspiration? Miriam, what is yours? Say in English, please. Yeah. Where is that? Oh, go to the ant, you sluggard, see her ways and become wise. A lot of wisdom there. Anybody else? What does that mean to you, Miriam? What does that mean? Go to the ant, you sluggard. See her ways and become wise. Learn from the ant. Lots to learn from the ant. The wisest of all men. Anybody else? An inspirational quote. Michael. In every distress will be a gain. What wisdom. In every suffering, there's purpose. You're not a victim. Anybody else? In every way you shall find God in everything that you do. Barbara. The soul of man is the lamp of God. It's on top of our yahrzeit memorial wall. So much wisdom there about how to mourn our loved ones. That just like a candle reaches upwards, not downwards. The soul of a person reaches higher. It wants to connect with God. That's why we say Kaddish. That's why we do mitzvahs to connect with our loved ones. We don't send them milk and cookies, right? Bruce, were you going to say something? Love conquers all sin. Love? Love conquers all sin. Ooh, love conquers all sins. It sounds like a Hollywood movie, right? Love conquers all, right? Yes? A mensch tracht and God lacht. Man plans and God laughs, right? A modern day aphorism. Good. I just want you to, they're all pearls of wisdom. It's right here from the book of the written Torah. Rob, last one. Oh, so riches won't help you on the day of death, but charity will avert the evil decree. Teshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, right? Remove the evil decree. So, yes, Joel. That's smart. You know what they say about that, Joel? They say if you keep quiet, people will think you're stupid. But if you open your mouth, they'll know you're stupid. Yeah, Bill. The soul of man is the candle of God. So much wisdom there, right? Now, bear in mind, we are just scratching the surface on the written Torah here today. Because today we're only talking about the written Torah. Lessons 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We're going to be dive deeper into the analysis of these incredible wisdoms that we find in the written Torah. But I also want to draw your attention, lastly, to page 52, where you'll find the 10 Commandments nicely listed. 10 Commandments. And also, can anybody think of major Torah commentaries? Any most famous Torah commentaries you can think of? Rashi, you'll find them on page 54, top left, the major Torah commentaries. Anybody else? Rashi lived almost 1,000 years ago in Troyes, France. Rambam, Maimonides, he's here too. You'll find him he's here on page, why don't I see him? Rambam is Maimonides. He's here somewhere on page 54. Anybody else? Any other? Yes? Isaiah. No, Isaiah was a prophet. He was way greater than the commentaries of Torah, right? Onkelos is here too. Onkelos was the nephew of Titus, who destroyed our second temple in Jerusalem, the most wicked tyrant. His nephew became a Jew. Onkelos wrote the most incredible commentary on Torah. You'll find him also here on page 54 and 55, just for you to review in your own time, to be able to find your bearings and your context in Torah. But let's keep this moving, guys. I want to make sure we finish what we prepared here today. So now that we've understood the context of the written Torah, now that we understand that all three sections of the Tanakh are all forms of divine revelation, we can now approach the oral Torah, which is the other side of this map. The two colorful, the next two sides of this map. Everything in black is written Torah, but the colorful part is the oral Torah. The written Torah is from God directly, but what about the oral Torah? Where does this come from? Is it of divine origin? The Torah gives us mixed messages, a paradox. On the one hand, the Torah tells us that the oral Torah does come from Sinai. Let's take a look at text number 6, please. You'll find text number 6. What page is it? Here, page 12. Thank you. Actually, I'm going to put it up on the screen. Text number 6 on the screen, scripture, Mishnah, Talmud, and Agada. All this is oral Torah. Even what a proficient student is destined to innovate were already said to Moses at Mount Sinai. So God has said all of the oral Torah at Mount Sinai. That's what it says on the one hand. But on the other hand, right, that's the written Torah and the oral Torah. But on the other hand, we know that the Torah is not in heaven. There's an amazing story in text number 7. An amazing story. I'm just going to read it through it quickly. On that day, there was a debate between the sages. They were arguing about something. I'm not going to get into it. But Rabbi Eliezer brought them, the other sages, all sorts of proofs, but they were rejected. So he said to them, if the law is as I say, this water channel shall prove it. The water channel began flowing backward. Can you imagine? It's a miracle, right? Said he to them, said they to him, sorry, it doesn't work. One does not cite halachic proof, legal proof from a water channel. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the law is with me, then the walls of the study hall should prove it. The walls of the study hall began caving in and began to fall. Rabbi Yeshua scolded the walls. This is Rabbi Yeshua of the other side. He said, no, if the Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of Torah law, well, then why are you walls getting involved? Why are you caving in on us? The walls did not fall out of deference to Rabbi Yeshua, and neither did they straighten out of deference to Rabbi Eliezer. They remained leaning. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the law is with me, let it be proven from heaven. I mean, seriously, you need proof. He says, okay, let God prove it. There then issued a heavenly voice which proclaimed, what do you think of Rabbi Eliezer? The law is as he says. A heavenly voice declares, the law is like Rabbi Eliezer. You think that's not enough? It should be enough, right? Rabbi Yeshua stood up on his feet and he said, Torah lo b'shamayim, the Torah is not in heaven. The Torah is not in heaven. God gave it to us, now it's ours. What is the meaning of the statement, is not in heaven? Said Rabbi Yirmiyah, as the Torah has already been given at Mount Sinai, we take no notice of heavenly voices. For you, God, have already written in the Torah at Mount Sinai, follow the majority. So right here on the screen, it says that everything in the oral Torah comes from Mount Sinai already. But in this text we have over here from the Talmud, it says that the Torah is not in heaven. The Torah goes by the majority rule of our human comprehension. It seems like the oral Torah is originating in our own minds. It's like we humans make it up. And the Rambam, Maimonides, says the same point in text number 8 as well, which I'm not going to read right now. that it goes by logic. It doesn't go by divine inspiration. So what then is the root, the source of oral Torah? The truth is that if you look closely at that text, number 6, if you look closely at that, and I'm going to put it back up on the screen. If you look at that text number 6, you notice the paradox here? One second, I'm going to go forward. This text over here on the screen, can you see a paradox on what it says on the screen? On the one hand, it says Scripture, Mishnah, Talmud, and Agada, even what a proficient student was said to Moses at Mount Sinai, right? But you see this word over here? To innovate? What do you mean to innovate? Hello? How are you innovating something that was already said? There's a paradox right here on the screen. This is Talmudic. On the one hand, it says that everything that is ever going to be incorporated in the oral Torah was already said to Moses at Mount Sinai. At the same time, it says that it's going to be innovated by somebody in 2023. So if we come up today with a Torah innovation, does that mean it was said to Moses at Mount Sinai, or do we innovate it? Can it be both? Well, apparently you're allowed to innovate. It says innovate. Right? We're using our brains to study Torah. If we come up today with a novelty that nobody ever thought of before, is that ours or was that said to Moses at Mount Sinai? It seems like both, right? It's a bit of a conflict, right? The same paradox emerges in this incredible story on page 16. Another amazing story. When Moses ascended on Mount Sinai, he found God attaching coronets, crowns, to the letters of the Torah. If you look at a Torah scroll, you see little crowns on top of each letter, of many letters. Said Moses to God, Master of the world, what are these for? Why are you putting the little crowns on the letters? Said God to him, there will be a man some generations hence, whose name is Akiva, the son of Joseph, and he will expound mounds upon mounds of laws from each and every tittle. Every little crown, he will be able to expound laws. Said Moses, Master of the world, show him to me. I'd love to see this guy. Moses now goes in a time machine. He now travels to the generation of Rabbi Akiva, who lived in the days of the Romans 1,000 years after Moses. Moses was sitting behind 8 rows of Rabbi Akiva's disciples, but he didn't understand what the rabbi was saying. Moses got depressed until they reached one teaching, and Rabbi Akiva's disciples said to him, they said, Rabbi, from where do you know this? How do you know? And Rabbi Akiva said, it is the law given to Moses at Mount Sinai. That's how I know. Because this law was given to Moses at Mount Sinai, and Moses' mind was eased. Amazing story. So Moses here doesn't understand what's flying in the class 1,000 years later. Yet, when Rabbi Akiva was questioned, he said, yeah, that's what was told to Moses at Mount Sinai. So it seems a little confusing. The way we can explain this idea of the origin of the oral Torah, how it's rooted both in Mount Sinai in God and in our own innovation, is from a modern day example of DNA. DNA. What's DNA? Here it is. What's DNA? DNA develops. It's a little code, right? It develops into a full organism. Inside of the DNA is the entire organism. It's just very, very, very densely compacted. It's going to need to be developed into the full organism. In much the same way, all of the Torah was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. But like Rob Riskin's bracelet, it was in microfilm. It was in DNA. He's got the whole Torah in a microfilm on his wrist. Because the whole Torah was given to Moses in DNA code. It was there. But it needed to develop into a full-blown organism. And that's what the innovation and the contribution of us mortals later on is all about. That explains Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva got this idea from where? It was sourced in Moses and Mount Sinai. But why didn't Moses know about it? Because it needed Rabbi Akiva's wisdom to extrapolate and explain what this was all about. We can take this one step further. Where does DNA become an organism? It needs, I think, a petri dish or something. It needs like a womb to be able to develop, right? In much the same way, what is the womb to develop the divine inspiration of Torah, of the oral Torah that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. What is the Petri dish where the divine inspiration of oral Torah evolves and emerges? That is in the human mind. Exactly. That is the human mind that serves as the womb that develops the seed of truth that was planted into it. And thus we find this incredible realization that the Torah is really a partnership between God and man. Just like in human reproduction, where you have the male inserts the sperm and the woman develops the sperm in the womb over 9 months to create a beautiful baby, so too God infuses the sperm, the idea, the inspiration, the essence, the core, the lightning strike. And we then need to unpack it over 3,000 years to be able to develop it into what becomes now the oral Torah. Is it a human innovation? Yes. Was it sourced in Mount Sinai? Absolutely. So we asked earlier why we need the Torah in two formats. Why we need a written Torah and why we need an oral Torah. The answer would be that God desires a partnership with us. God didn't want to just dump the Torah on us. You know what a document dump is? When somebody wants to make you go away, they send you 10,000 pages worth. The lawyers should know what I'm talking about. They send you 10,000 pages worth of documents that you're never going to possibly be able to read, right? And make you go away. But God didn't want to do that to us. He wanted us to be partners with him in creation. He wanted us to experience and be part of the evolution of creation of this world from a jungle into a beautiful place. And thus, he partners with our human mind, like that sperm in the womb, like the DNA developing in the Petri dish, to be able to evolve and develop into a beautiful being, which is what is the Torah. There's a beautiful explanation of this idea on page 19. Now, this actually is from a medrash that is attributed to Elijah the prophet. Elijah the prophet's been to your house for dinner? Once a year he comes to you for dinner. Twice a year he comes for dinner. He doesn't eat much, I know. He drinks, he likes to drink. But he doesn't drink and drive, he drinks and flies. Okay, so, you know why he doesn't come through why he comes through the front door? We open the door on Pesach night, right? Because the chimney was already taken. So here's what he says, Elijah the prophet on page 19. Here's what he says. I was once traveling on the road when a person encountered me. This person had scripture, but he did not have Mishnah. He had the written Torah, but not the oral Torah. He said to me, Master, written Torah was given to us in Mount Sinai, but oral Torah was not given to us in Mount Sinai. He didn't believe in the oral Torah. I said to him, my son, both scripture, written Torah, and Mishnah, oral Torah, issued from the mouth of the Almighty. What is the difference between them? The following parable will explain this. There was a king who had two beloved servants. He gave a measure of wheat to one of them and a measure of wheat to the other. He also gave each a bundle of flax. So each servant got wax and wheat. The wise one amongst them took the flax, and he wove a beautiful cloth out of it. He took the wheat and he made fine flour from it, sifting it, milling it, kneading it, and baking it. He arranged it on a table and spread the beautiful cloth over it, setting it aside for when the king would come. So he took the flax into a tablecloth, the wheat into beautiful meal, bread. The foolish servant, what did he do? Garnished, nothing. Then the king arrived in his palace and he says to his two servants, my children, present to me what I've gifted to you. The first one brought him the bread, made of fine flour on a table with a beautiful cloth spread over it. And the other brought him out the wheat in a box with a bundle of flax on top of it. Now, which of the servants is more precious to the king? When the Almighty gave the Torah to the people of Israel, he gave it to us as wheat from which we make fine flour, and as flax for us to weave into a cloth. The baker and the weaver inspires us to recognize and embrace the reality of what Torah is, that God desires us to partner with him, to develop his raw material into something special and unique. which expresses our unique connection with God. And therefore, in conclusion, all parts of Torah manifest the partnership with God. All parts of Torah. When you start off, it just depends with different levels of human participation, right? When we start off with the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, what was the involvement? It was Moses' throat. That was the involvement. Then comes the prophets, and that goes through the minds and hearts of the prophets, which needed to be then interpreted. A further dilution of the divine spirit is in the writings, when you have the grasping of the pen, of the quill, when it's not even in their minds and hearts, it's just that their pen writes things that they didn't realize where they came from. And then we move on to the oral Torah. So in the written Torah, it's the divine revelation which is more dominant, while the human involvement is secondary, throat, mind, pen, right? But in the oral Torah, it doesn't work like that. In the oral Torah, it's the human mind that is dominant, like the wheat and the baker and the weaver, where God empowers the human mind to expound and articulate His wisdom and will. And this is the reason why, when we compare the two, the written Torah and the oral Torah, we find that the written Torah will emphasize the written word, and the oral Torah will emphasize more the person, the content, the idea. And that's why you'll notice that when we come up to the Torah, we'll make a blessing over the Torah. Baruch atah Hashem asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu Torah. Baruch atah Hashem noten Torah. Before learning Torah, we make a blessing over the Torah. Now, what are you blessing over? Before you eat an apple, you make a blessing. Before you drink wine, you make a blessing, right? Before you experience something, you have to bless it. Can you make a blessing over Torah if you didn't understand it? What do you think? Can you make? You can? When you come up to the bima and you get an aliyah, do you understand what's flying in the Torah? Most probably not, right? But you still made a blessing. That's only true in the written part of Torah. Only the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, you're allowed to do that with, or the 5 books of Moses, the prophets and the writings. Because there, what's dominant is the word of God. Is the word, and that's how the word is so precise. But when it comes to, we fulfill the mitzvah of learning just by saying the words. But when it comes to the oral Torah, there it's about the understanding. And if you're going to study oral Torah, you cannot make a blessing on the Torah if you just read the words on the oral Torah. You have to understand. So Corey, when you teach a class on oral Torah, on the Mishnah, you need to understand what you're saying. If you're going to make a blessing and just read the words, you've not fulfilled your obligation. Because only in the written Torah are the words dominant. In the oral Torah, it's about the understanding. Exactly. If you don't understand, you don't teach it, right? Now, it's interesting. I just want to point out that Roz Newman over here also, she just showed me earlier a book that comes from her ancestors. It was Rabbi Yisachar of Dinov, right? Rabbi Yisachar of Dinov, who wrote a book that's with us here today, which is also part of the oral Torah. Roz and then we'll be discussing in next week's class. We'll be talking about more about that. But I'd just like to conclude by saying this. So today we've discovered the written Torah as the foundation of all of Torah. Like DNA, which contains all the details of the organism within it, the written Torah contains all the genres of Torah within it, which incorporate the ethics and the history and the philosophy and the law. Everything is sourced inside of the written Torah, because the written Torah is the source code for all of the details that eventually emerge in the oral Torah. And that's why, as we are about to discover in the next 5 sessions, the other 5 genres of Torah, we will always be able to trace them back to the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and the writings, which make up the written Torah. There's actually a very beautiful piece here on page 23. It says that when God gave the Torah on Mount Sinai, it says his voice ceased, or did not cease. It says his voice did not cease. And there's two interpretations of what it means, a great voice that did not cease. One says a voice that did not stop talking, and the other verse says a voice that did stop talking. So did God continue talking at Mount Sinai, or did he not continue talking at Mount Sinai? This shows you how we can never dismiss Torah at face value. This is divine wisdom. Let's take a look at this beautiful idea in closing. So again, it's page 23. In the blessing recited before studying Torah, we say, "Blessed are you, God, who gives the Torah." In truth, God has already given us the Torah at Mount Sinai, yet he still gives the Torah in the present tense, present participle, perpetually. This matter requires some elaboration. The Torah is constantly being given. Why? Because the Torah says in Deuteronomy, these words God spoke to your entire assembly at the mountain, a great voice that did not cease. Rashi explains, so that's the 5 books of Moses, right? Rashi explains the meaning of the words did not cease, v'lo yasach. In accordance with the translation of Onkelos, it did not stop, for it is a powerful voice that endures forever. So God spoke a voice that continues forever. But Rashi then also offers a second interpretation of the words v'lo yasach, that it did not anymore, which means that God did not speak again, speak so openly and publicly as he did at Mount Sinai. So which one is it? Does it mean that at Mount Sinai, next week's Torah portion, God spoke and did not stop, or did he speak and never continue? How can it be both? Let's see. So that's exactly right. There is a profound significance in these two interpretations, and they are simultaneously true. The divine voice spoke the Torah at Sinai and did not anymore, as all the subsequent laws and edicts instituted by the sages throughout the generations were not explicitly commanded by God at the time. At the same time, it did not cease, for everything was already included in potential form within that voice, like the DNA code. It is only that for everything there is a time and season, Ecclesiastes, and the time has not yet come for that potential to emerge into actuality, as that depends on the initiative of those down here below, in accordance with their nature and their abilities, and in accordance with the qualities of the souls of each generation. The sages of each generation were then roused to actualize from that potential in accordance with this time, with their time and season. Thus, the sages did not invent anything from their own minds, God forbid, but rather actualized the divine intent. This is why we need to have the written Torah as well as the oral Torah, for us to be able to realize, friends, that God wants us as a partner. In closing, I just want to close by 2 points. What this means is that we live our lives, and we're pretty privileged if we're living in Palm Beach, Florida. Life could have been a lot worse, right? Here we're complaining about the third car, the fourth garage door is not opening properly, right? We have real problems, right? But we're searching for meaning. We're searching for purpose and value in our lives. Where are you going to find that value? Are you going to find it in another round of golf? You're going to find it in another hobby, in another dinner, and another cruise, or another walk, whatever. What we just realized, friends, is that when we study Torah, you're actually getting into partnership with the Almighty Master of the universe, who needs you to serve as his petri dish, to serve as his womb. God, in a sense, is making love to you as you study Torah and evolve and develop these magnificent, majestic, and powerful truths that God needs you to develop. Because like Rob Riskin's microfilm, it's not really readable. It's there, but it's not really there, right? If you get a very powerful telescope. So find the telescope and open it up. We can experience true value and purpose in our lives. We can experience true value and purpose in our lives when we study Torah. We literally are shattering the glass ceiling by breaking free from our definition as creations, as we become one with the Master of the universe, with the Creator, with Almighty God, each and every single time that you study Torah. And I'm going to conclude with a quick story. The story is about the fourth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe Shmuel, about whom my son Shmuel, who just walked by, is named after. His bris was on the birthday of the Rebbe Marash. So the Rebbe Marash was the fourth Chabad Rebbe, lived in Lubavitch in Russia, White Russia. One day, very much out of character, he stopped off in a certain village and he walked uninvited into the home of a farmer, a Jewish farmer. The farmer was not there, only the wife and the two young boys. He then asked the two young boys to please join him in reciting chapters from the book of Psalms. The Rebbe, can you imagine the Rebbe walks into your home and he wants to read some chapters of Psalms with your children? Okay, says the wife. What? And they read chapters about half an hour, book of Psalms. The Rebbe then gets up and he starts to leave. And as he reaches the door, he comes back and he says, we got to do it again. And he sits down with the two boys. And once again, they read the book of Psalms for about half an hour. With that, he gets up. Nice to see you. And he goes off. Late that night, there's a banging on the door. A pale, battered, and bruised father shows up at the door. He's slumped at the door. The wife pulls him in. She says, what happened to you? He says, you won't believe it. Chaste Hashem, the kindness of God. He says, this morning I went off to another town to collect payment from a peasant who owed me some money. As I went up to collect the money from him, he tied me up and he said he was going to kill me. He said he was going to kill me. He tied me up and there he went looking for his axe. He couldn't find his axe. While he was lost looking for his axe, his wife found me. She realized what her husband was doing. So she quickly untied me and she let me go. And then I ran off. I was running through a field and I saw what? I realized I needed to hide. So I saw there was some bales of hay. I hid underneath the bales of hay. And then the farmer came looking for me. And he was all over the hay. He was searching for me all over the hay. But thank God, a second time in one day, my life was saved. He gave up in the search and he went off. And it was then that the mother and the boys realized, now we understand the peculiarity of the Rebbe Maharash who came today to our home, not once but twice, to recite the verses of the book of Psalms. And it wasn't enough that he did it once. He saw that he needed to do it a second time because he must have sensed that your life was in danger and therefore he needed to save your life. What were they doing? Were they studying? Were they understanding the book of Psalms? Have you ever read the book of Psalms? It's very difficult to understand the depth of King David's wisdom in the book of Psalms. By merely reading the book of Psalms, friends, since time immemorial, what Jews have done in times of distress is to incessantly read the book of Psalms. I know from personal experience, when you want someone in your life to experience blessing, you recite their chapter in Psalms every day. What their chapter, there's 150 chapters in Psalms. You take one above their age. So if I'm 42 years old, I'm in my 43rd year of life, I say chapter 43 every day. For my wife, I say chapter 40. And for all my children, I go from 15 and down, right? All the way down, right? So you take that person in your life that you want to pray for, you want to channel blessing, just read the chapter one above their age, and you will be channeling blessings to them. Do you understand what you're saying? It makes no difference whatsoever. You know why? Because you're reading the written Torah. When you're reading the written Torah, it's about the divinity. It's not about the human encounter. It's not about the understanding. It's about the letters. It's about the words. It's about the actual verses. And by merely reciting those verses, that is how you are going to be channeling the most extraordinary blessings to you and to your loved ones. Next week, God willing, we will be going beyond the written Torah. We will be exploring the 5 genres which are listed here in our map. Next week, we'll be taking on the Medrash, which is a set of books. We'll be discovering if it is merely a set of books, or is it a methodology, or is it both? The method with which the sages excavate the multiple layers of meaning within the words and between the lines of the written Torah. We will also explore the mysterious pathways of the Midrashic parable. If you haven't yet signed up, please sign up with Ashley at the front door. She'll get your textbooks for you. I'm grateful for you joining me here today. Please stick around. I'd love to take your questions and would love to hear from you. If you want to send me an email to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com.